Okay, so good afternoon. We're going to talk about the PEAK programs in English at Komaba. And as you can see, my name is at the bottom there, Bregham Dalgliesh. What I want to talk you through is obviously to sell you PEAK. So try and tell you why it's interesting to come to Japan, Tokyo, the University of Tokyo, and then PEAK itself. So let me start by firstly saying a few obvious things about why study in Japan. Probably we might start with the classic idea of tradition, and a lot of these pictures in the slides actually come firsthand. So my colleague who can't be here today, this is actually a picture of her brother who got married recently in a very traditional Japanese wedding. So as you no doubt many of you know, Japan is very much a country of tradition and has managed to maintain that despite its integration and opening up to the West over the last century and a half. But Japan is also obviously a very modern country, and the example we have here is Starbucks. So it's a nice example, isn't it, of I think that's Starbucks in Fukuoka, which has got sort of the best of Japanese design, interior design with the American brand. But not only is it traditional and modern, but it's also a country of hybridity. And that hybridity is my son going to school when he was 9 with his randuseru, this famous little backpack that the school kids had. And when I first got to Japan, I lived in Tama Center, which is in the west of Tokyo. And he was the only foreign child in his school, but nonetheless, he managed to do very well. So there's one reason to start studying in Japan. Other reasons might be, obviously, its beauty. I'm calling this cultivated beauty. I'm sure all of you know these images. The gardens in and around Mount Fuji, or the, as we call it, the Silver Pavilion in Kyoto. But also, for those of you who know Tokyo and who might like the beach, like myself, if you're looking for white beaches, you can also access those quite nicely. That's Shirahama Beach, down at the bottom of the Izu Peninsula, about 2.5 hours from Tokyo. And many people don't know, the University of Tokyo has a dormitory down there where you can go and stay and access that beach at something like 1,000 or 2,000 yen a night. So there's some reasons to study in Japan. Why study in Tokyo? So I see quite a few parents here, or parent-esque looking people, worried maybe about sending their child to a foreign country. So I suppose one of the key things here is security and safety. And in the Economist survey of the most safe cities in the world, for the 5th year running, Tokyo was, I won't say elected, but came top of the charts, let's say, in terms of safety, just slightly ahead of Singapore. And that sort of is rather a general figure, but what does it actually mean? What type of safety are they talking about? Well, I suppose the first thing we want to worry about here is in terms of digital security. So Tokyo here was the first in terms of security. This is things like safety from hacking and using mobile phones as actually filming events that you can use as witnesses. So that sort of thing, Tokyo ranks first. But also, maybe digital security doesn't strike you as too important. To some extent, it is less important than your actual physical health security. So again, Tokyo and Japan, in fact, generally is very well catered for here. You have hospitals, you have healthcare services very widely available, you have social care services. All these are very good, and also a very healthy urban environment. Tokyo, the largest metropolis in the world, but of course also a fairly green space, a very clean space with a lot of hybrid vehicles, so not a lot of pollution. I personally find it a very quiet city. A lot of the engines turned off, and I often wake up, I live 5 minutes from here, and I wake up in the morning at 6 and hear the birds singing for an hour or so before the buzz of the city takes over. So that's very important for us, but I suppose also personal security. How safe is it to walk around the streets? I'm sure all female students and my female colleagues and all women I know feel that it's an extremely safe city to walk around in at any time. The number of crime is very low. Obviously, The Economist, in doing these charts, factored in things like terrorist attacks, and fortunately we're very far from that in this part of the world. But they also mentioned something called cultural values that shapes personal security. And in 2016, there was over 3.6 billion yen, that's about 34 million US dollars, handed in by people who found wallets, money on the metro, in the street. So they mentioned that in the Economist survey is quite unique to Tokyo, this sense of honesty where, as I say, $34 million in 1 year was handed in by people, and 75% of that figure went back to the original owners. So it's very interesting, very unique. There's a great film as well called Tokyo Sonata by Kurosawa. If you ever see that, they show that side of Tokyo. So a lot of honesty contributes to personal security. And finally, where Tokyo did less well, which is quite surprising, is infrastructure security. But nonetheless, it's still 12, which is not bad. The main reason it fell a little bit here is because one of the factors here is they look at the number of population, the number of people, in relation to public transport. And as I'm sure you've experienced, perhaps coming here today, trains can be fairly crowded. But nonetheless, even though they are crowded, they're still extremely efficient and clean, aren't they? So those are some of the reasons to study in Tokyo. On a more everyday level, Tokyo, in terms of a survey here in 2018, came out second as just one of the most a nice place to live, a place you want to walk out, you can access facilities, you can access great cultural activities, you can take a train to get to the mountains, to the snow within an hour or two. Tokyo came out very well, and of course, as students, you'll probably have friends coming to visit you, parents, family. When TripAdvisor voted it as the best place to visit as a tourist. So you'll always have a lot of people coming to see you, as I do myself and have done for the last 7 or 8 years. And everyone speaks about the great experience of being a tourist in Tokyo, and that only obviously gets better with the Olympics and the Rugby World Cup coming up. So the University of Tokyo, why study here? I suppose if you were from Japan itself, I wouldn't need to do this presentation. It's Japan's premier university, and that's the famous Akamon, which you may have walked through just a minute ago. So why come to the University of Tokyo? I suppose we should start off with some traditional things. It's Japan's oldest university if we look at it in terms of imperial university. When it first started in 1877, it was called the University of Tokyo. 9 years later, they changed that to simply call it the Imperial University. And then in 1897, when they decided to build or establish a second university, does anyone know what the second national imperial university was that was established in Japan after University of Tokyo? Any guesses? And there'll be a free bottle of Coke for those who guess right. Or free admission into PEAK. No takers? Okay. Kyoto. Okay. So in 1897, when they set up Kyoto, they obviously had to then distinguish Tokyo from it, so it got called Tokyo Imperial University. That is actually what do we call them now? A person-hole cover, a man-hole cover. If you go to the main library on this campus and you're facing the entrance to the main library, you go to your right, you'll see another entrance. Right there, you'll see this manhole cover. And it's interesting because it must date from before the Second World War, because as you can see, it says Tokyo Imperial University. But we also, the top picture then is the University of Tokyo's original building. After the Second World War, it was rechristened the University of Tokyo from Tokyo Imperial University, and where the PEAK program is located at Komaba campus, that is what's called the Ethics Hall, because originally where lectures in ethics were delivered, and today it's one of the largest lecture theaters with an organ, and where you often have music recitals. But at that campus, you have the CAS, the College of Arts and Sciences, was established in 1949, and as you see, PEAK was set up a little over 7 years ago. So that's one reason to come here. We also, at the university, have several Nobel laureates. I won't mention them, you've seen them already over there. Across the disciplines, primarily the natural sciences, the university is very strong in that area, but also in literature as well. In terms of the education, what do you get when you come here? You can see we have a large number of faculty. I'm talking on the right-hand side there, a little under 4,000. That doesn't probably mean a lot to you, but what it does mean is a student-faculty ratio of 1 to 8. So on average in a classroom, you're going to have 8 people. That's an extremely rare and privileged academic environment. In any other university in the world, and I've taught in several countries, that faculty-student ratio is closer to 1 in 20 and above. So that tells you how the way that the university runs, a lot of face-to-face time between faculty and students, whether it's in a classroom, whether it's in supervision. And PEAK only reiterates that because the program is relatively small and a lot of the classes have 7, 8, even 5 or 6 students, which makes them extremely interactive and dynamic. The old idea of a professor who stands up and lectures for an hour doesn't really exist in PEAK. You can also see there that there are a little under 4,000 international students. You can see most of them are at the graduate level, the master's or the PhD, but there are a significant amount there at undergraduate level, and many of them are located at PEAK itself. And so where do they come from? Again, it's not surprising to see that most of the foreign students come from Asia, primarily China, as most foreign people in Japan, the largest proportion come from China, not only students, but generally those who live and work here. After Asia, we have Europe, and then North America, and then other areas of the world scattered in. So quite a diverse student body in terms of international makeup and point of origin. In terms of studying at this university, it's obviously convenient. It's in the center of Tokyo, not like many universities which have moved out. This is a phenomenon obviously not particular to Tokyo. Previously, I worked in France, and many of the French universities located in central Paris are now on the outskirts as well. But Tokyo, the University of Tokyo is where we are now. The Hongo is very central, but Komaba as well is on the Yamanote line, just a station off it. It's easy access in terms of everything the city has to offer, but also from airports for friends, but also going abroad, outside of Tokyo, a day trip to Mount Takao to climb the mountains, skiing in Nagano, down to the beach. All these are very, very accessible to you. I see sort of looks of consternation and perplexed students here going to the beach. Yeah, I know people don't like to do that, but it should be encouraged. Huh? So convenience, it's very convenient. But also, so we have tradition, we have convenience. We also have quality. For better or for worse, these university world rankings are very subjective, obviously skewed quite strongly in favor of Anglophone universities. But nonetheless, despite the fact that the university has to compete very much in an Anglophone world, it still manages to come in at 23. Until 2 years ago, it was a leading Asian university, but the National University of Singapore has overtaken us due to a large amount of investment. So the university is still one of the top-ranked universities in the world, and with that comes all the opportunities of research, of collaboration, of exchanges that you can undertake. What's also of relevance, especially to those who are parents here, is maybe the money you have to pay to get your child here. So I did a little reverse league table of my own. So what I've taken is in the previous slide, you have the top 10. I took a random sample, the top 5, plus one from the number 11 there, Singapore. I took a few other Asian universities. And I've kept those same universities and I've ranked them in terms of tuition fees. That's, in other words, cost. And the Swiss Federal Institute comes out top because it's a federal institute. It's still very much the social democratic model in Europe, where government funds essentially the cost of tuition. But we rank very well, close to Peking University and Seoul National. But then you see the other universities, the cost is significantly higher. Obviously, these are different systems, but cost nonetheless is very important. And of course, in Japan, there's no discrimination between home and foreign students either, which is very unusual too. So it's a very cost-effective place to come to, in addition to the quality that you're getting as well. So the question is, what is PEAK? Programs in English at Kamaba, an acronym developed by, I think, Professor Woodward, or someone. So one of my colleagues in the very early years, and you all have your bags there. These are some of the students on the Kamaba campus. So PEAK is at the Kamaba campus. Again, the snow picture there is one I took this year in January. It's the entrance to the main campus there. We also have, there's the November and May festivals at university. You can see in the bottom right, where all the different circles and groups and associations of the students come together for 2 or 3 days and have a non-stop, essentially non-stop party on campus, a very vibrant atmosphere. It's open to the public and it's a really great moment. But of course, PEAK is also 10 minutes walk with my legs anyway, maybe 15 for you, from Shibuya, which again offers you so many things to do. Why did we set up PEAK? There's a whole history behind it, prompted by the government and its Global 30 program to try and obviously get English-mediated programs running at universities to attract foreign students is one of the reasons. And when we were given that sort of imperative, we decided to focus on environmental science and what we call Japan in East Asia. Environmental science possibly speaks for itself. Japan, obviously, amongst the many stereotypes which I played on at the beginning of tradition and modernity, is also the other stereotype of the technologically savvy society, a society which is very much at home and mixing human and machine. So the environmental sciences makes sense. Also, of course, the resources here are limited, so the need to develop green technologies and find solutions to the technological problems that may, an economy like this encounters is very important, and the university and other universities, in fact, in Japan are very well known for that. In terms of Japan and East Asia, Rajiv Gandhi and Deng Xiaoping met in 1988 and spoke about the Asian century, the idea being that the 18th century was the century of the British, the 19th century was the century of the British, the 20th of the Americans, and the 21st of Asia, which doesn't bode too well if you think that the previous two were country-specific, whereas Asia is rather a large area. But nonetheless, the idea is that the 21st century is the Asian century. Japan and East Asia is a program where students can learn about how to install and have a vibrant democracy such as Japan, how to reboot an economy that was crippled in the Second World War. It also has a very vibrant culture. I'm sure many of the PEAK students come here for some cultural reason. They watched an anime show when they were 5 years old and it's stuck in their head ever since, or they have a parent or a link back here. So these are some of the reasons, the rationale behind why we set up these two programs. And the degrees you get are fully fledged University of Tokyo degrees. They are 4-year undergraduate degrees, as is the case with most universities in Japan, offer 4 years as opposed to 3 years in some countries. They are 100% mediated in English, so all the courses are taught in English. As we've said several times before, and I'm sure you've read, there is no prerequisite of Japanese required to enter the university. Being taught in English means that many of the faculty, like myself, are not from Japan. I'm personally from South Africa. We have colleagues from Canada, the US, from France, Romania. In fact, I don't think she's here, but my colleague speaking after me is from France, Isabel. So you have a diverse faculty, but also the Japanese faculty who might teach you. Many of them, if not all of them, have done their PhD or a postdoc, or they've done a 5-year stint through Riken at some foreign university. So they're all versed and well attuned to what it means to be teaching and working in an international environment, which many of the PEAK students themselves are. In terms of the curriculum, well, like most of the University of Tokyo, there's this, what's called this liberal arts curriculum in the first 2 years. Everyone does that. The idea is to, allow you to spread your wings intellectually and cover as many different fields as possible. So it's really a smorgasbord of courses that you can choose from in the first 2 years. And as I say, the Japanese courses for PEAK students are mandatory in those first 2 years. In the 3rd and 4th year, it becomes slightly more specialized. Students go on to one or the other of the programs. Actually, upon entry, you are admitted onto the PEAK Japan in East Asia or the PEAK Environmental Sciences course. You can't switch between the two. And then I had a question earlier from the gentleman there from the Czech Republic, I think it was, about how you can sort of, if you're interested in the humanities, for example, can you do things that are not strictly linked to Japan and East Asia? Well, the answer is yes. In a Bachelor of Liberal Arts degree, you have a lot of flexibility in defining a little bit your own curriculum. And especially in your 4th year as an undergraduate thesis, you choose your supervisor, and you can pursue in-depth over the course of a year in relation to your supervisor, something that's very particular to you in terms of your intellectual interest. So it doesn't have to be linked directly, for example, to Japan and East Asia. I supervised a student this year who did the philosophy of difference in relation to diversity in American universities. So quite far from the idea of Japan and East Asia. So that just shows you the range to which you can satisfy your own intellectual curiosity within the flexibility of this program. In terms of PEAK living costs, so I might now call on some of the two students here to talk a little bit more more detail about everyday life as a student at the University of Tokyo. I've got the basic expenses here. Accommodation is 40,000 yen per month, which is all PEAK students are guaranteed a place in the university dormitory, which is 5 minutes walk from the Komaba campus. So that's a very good thing to have, especially when you come from abroad. And living expenses on average is about 80,000 yen per month. But those are fairly abstract figures or numbers. So let me ask Julie or just to say a few things about what it is to live in Japan as a student, if you wouldn't mind.
I'm Julie, and I study in the PEAK ES program, and I'm in the 3rd year, planning to go to the 4th year in September. And I think the basic introductions of PEAK were done by Professor Dalgliesh, but then I'd like to focus more on the non-academic aspects of PEAK. I'm half Indian, half Japanese, and I decided to join PEAK because it was a program which really interested me, the environmental sciences program, as well as the best thing was I could learn everything in English. And I had been living in India for 12 years, and studying in Japanese was really difficult for me. So, and after joining PEAK, the first thing which really impressed me was the cultural diversity. There are people from different countries, like countries from Asia, of course, like China or India, where I come from, as well as people from Russia or Slovenia as well. And talking to people from different countries really broadens your perspective as well as way of thinking. And just not only talking with them, but since there exist dormitories, you live with them, stay with them, and so you really get cultural shocks and differences. And so that's how you really I think there is another way of thinking, as well as your mind becomes more open and perspective. And your perspective becomes more wider, and you really can accept a lot of things. And with respect to the non-academic aspects, I spent most of my half of my life in PEAK and half of my life outside PEAK. Of course, my major is environmental sciences, and I study in PEAK in English. But my Japanese level is pretty okay to good enough to take courses in English, Japanese as well. So I take my sub-major in sports science as well as in behavioral and cognitive sciences, and all of the courses are offered in Japanese. So there is a placement test in the beginning of Japanese, which tests your Japanese level, and you're divided into 5 groups. And if your Japanese level is good enough to take the Japanese courses, you are really open to take courses in Japanese as well. And I think that's a really good point, because there are a variety of courses which are offered in Japanese, and you can take them, which count as credits, apart from the classes which are offered in PEAK. And apart from that, I belong to the girls' soccer club, and I practice 4 times a week. And so all of my communications there are in Japanese. But there are a variety of clubs and circles which exist in the University of Tokyo, and people from most of them are Japanese, but they are really open to foreigners as well. So they are very kind enough, and they take you. They would really ask you questions about your life in other countries as well, and you can really get close to them because you meet them for 4 or 5 or 6 times a week just to practice, as well as you spend a lot of time with them when you join clubs or circle activities. Also, if you're not, related to the living costs, if you're really worried, you can also teach English to Japanese people as a part-time job, which is what I do, and the pay is really good if you're teaching. There are very few people who can actually teach English to Japanese people, as well as you can, there are scopes for teaching English to foreign students as well, maybe kids from 5 to 10 years old. I basically teach TOEFL to kids, to international kids who are planning to apply to Japanese universities, like, people who are planning to apply to PEAK or planning to apply to SFC of KO University and stuff. So the pay is pretty good. So like you can earn expenses for playing and, whatever you need. And apart from that, for my future career, I am planning to work in Japan. I'm thinking of working in Japan. There are many people who work in Japan as well as who go to masters in other foreign universities, as well as there are people who go to GPEAK, which is a graduate program in graduate program of the PEAK. So there are different scopes, but I'm planning to work in Japan, and I do a lot of internships related to media and human resources. And so like there are a lot of options, and you can also work in English in Japan. Like there are a lot of like foreign companies in Japan if you're planning to work in Japan and if you want to use English, because I think working environment in Japan is like really, really safe and really, really interesting. So I think all of my 3 years in PEAK after I came here, I have no regrets, and my life in PEAK has been really impressive. So maybe if you have any questions, you could come and ask me later. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks very much, Julia. It's always nice to have a first-hand perspective, I think, especially from students. It's much easier for the prospective students to identify with them. So in terms of scholarships, so we also have various scholarships available. They're all merit-based. Some of them, the two first ones, the U-Tokyo 4-year scholarship and the Japanese MEX scholarship, cover full tuition and living expenses for the 4 years. Upon application, and if you're successful, you're ranked. So as I say, it's merit-based. So these are very generous scholarships and cover all of the expenses you have. And as Julie says, you can also get rich teaching kids in English. So those are some of the scholarships that we offer, or the Ministry of Education offers. The application process, well, it starts in December and January. The first part is obviously completing the documents. All this information I'm giving you now is online on the PEAK website. So there's document screening. You submit your documents, and we obviously evaluate those. As a very broad rule of thumb, we have about 400 applicants, and probably around 400, depends on the year, in the first stage in December and January. We then obviously screen, so we evaluate those 400 or so applicants and shortlist about 80 or 90, roughly. Don't hold me to these figures. And those who are shortlisted then have an interview. In principle, this is in the country where you are resident. If you're sort of wondering if you heard correctly, that means that we fly to you. That's how much we value your input. But we fly and do interviews in some of the major cities, and if you can't get to those cities, we make other arrangements. And this has been one of our strong points. I mean, a lot of students have told us how they really enjoy having this face-to-face interview, even though it can be quite logistically and financially costly, not to you, but to us. So that's the second stage of interviews in February and March. Then obviously we decide who to admit, and you are told about the success or not of your application in April, either conditional, if you still have to submit grades, IB, for example, which is written in the summer, so you'll have an offer conditional on getting a certain grade. And then, of course, if that offer is accepted or your conditions are met, you then enroll at the university in September, about September the 20th, I think you said earlier. So you can see that's basically the application process, and you start applying from the 25th of October until the 27th of November. You have a month to get those application documents to us. Eligibility, well, of course you have to go to school before you come to PEAK. Everyone does that. There's 12 years, but I put 9 in brackets there. The reason is that out of your primary school, so this is a broad average. I'm using figures here from the World Bank, which says that most people tend to have 6 years of primary and 6 years of secondary school. So of the 6 years of primary school, generally from 5 to 11, of those 6 years, 4 of them have to be in a language other than Japanese, sorry. Okay. So it cannot be in Japanese, 4 of those 6 years. In terms of your secondary schooling, your high school, at least 5 years of secondary schooling has to be taught in a language other than Japanese. These are rather stiff criteria, but it essentially means that most of our students come from outside Japan. But of course, if you're at an international school in Japan and you've been at, let's say, for example, the British school from the day you started school, then of course you can apply, no problem. But those are some of the eligibility criteria. The application documents I won't spend too much time on because the time is precious. But again, all these documents and requirements are available on the website. But obviously the application form, the essay form, and other things like school transcripts, test scores of English if that is a requirement as well. Again, these are just guidelines of some of the grades, the averages that students get into PEAK. So if you're doing IB, for example, International Baccalaureate, most of our students get over 36 out of 42 as an average. If you're doing A-levels, typically it's an AAB. So we have fairly high criteria, certainly the highest of all the international programs in Japan. And the reason is we want to maintain the quality of the university and keep the students very academically challenged. Finally, just the potential of PEAK. What do people do? So we have some fairly new figures. We've got these figures are for students who graduated in 2014, 15, and 16. In fact, the first graduates were in 2014. It's not as though we just suddenly realized we should have these figures. They're very fresh because there weren't that many graduates around. You can see roughly, between around 50% of students go on to graduate school, about 40% go on to the world of work, and another 10% are other. That could be military service, it could be a gap year. So that's broadly the average between the two programs. The Japan and East Asia students do slightly more postgraduate study than the East environmental sciences. I'm rushing a little bit here, but you can see the country location. So what stands out on your right is that most of our graduates who work in Japan, over 80%. On the left-hand side, you can see the places they do graduate school. The US is dominant there, but also quite a nice diverse selection of other universities across the world and not just in the Asia region. You can have a quick look there of some of the universities where the students have gone on to graduate study. I'll let you have a look at that. I won't read through it. Sorry to have to rush a little bit. So again, it's just a range of universities worldwide, all very, very highly ranked and respectable universities, either slightly above the University of Tokyo in ranking or a few places below it. And finally, just in terms of employment, so I have some of the companies that the Japan and East Asia students where they work. You can see, Rakuten, an online retailer, Accenture, and other companies. These are consultants. BlackRock is a financial services company. Mizuho, a well-known Japanese bank. So a range of careers that people do. And as we saw earlier, over 80% of these people, the graduates, are working in Japan. And finally, just in terms of the environmental sciences students, we have the large multinational corporations, IBM, Facebook, Nomura, a well-known Japanese financial house, investment bank. Again, very diverse in where they work. But as I say, what's not diverse is the fact that they're all in Japan. I think many people want to do that, so that's a great plus. So let me pass on to first-hand experience of university life to Leah.
Oh, too many equipments. Okay. Hi, I'm Leah, and I'm also a third-year ES Environmental Sciences student, which means I'm a rising senior. So I will try to provide you guys with some insider's notes, something that Professor Bregham didn't mention in his presentation. So first of all, as he mentioned, PEAK stands for Programs in English at Komaba. Apparently we have programs in Japanese in Hongo campus, in Yayoi campus, in Kashiwa campus, but then we don't call them PJAH or whatever. It's just for PEAK. And it's because PEAK is a special program. Like the programs at Komaba campus are liberal arts program, and the characteristics of PEAK, being an interdisciplinary liberal arts program is actually very important as a student. So when you think of environmental sciences and imagine this program to be like an ecology or like biology, or imagine like history or philosophy programs for JA program, then you might be surprised about the content of the course and the course structure. Being an interdisciplinary program, we don't focus, especially for ES program, we don't focus on one particular discipline, although it is possible for you to choose one of your most interested area to focus on your graduate thesis, or you can plan your course schedule to be like that. But then as a PEAK student, we get to take courses from various disciplines. So for example, for the first 2 years of the PEAK program, we belong to what's called junior division. And during the junior division, for ES students, we have to take like all 4 different like science areas, for example, like chemistry, biology, earth science, and physics. We have to take all of that, and we have to take calculus, and then based on those general education, we get to choose what we are truly interested in, and we get to pursue them further through our senior division courses. And although it is introduced as the first 2 years of program for the junior division, we can actually start taking senior division courses from our 4th semester. So it's actually more like an year and a half for the junior division. And even if you belong to ES or JEA program, it is, as Julie mentioned, you're free to take courses outside of PEAK as well, depending on your language ability and your interests. And also, it is also possible for you to audit or take and get credits for graduate school's courses in senior division if you're really interested in one particular subject. Yeah, I mentioned this, and I would like to talk a bit about the Japanese language courses. So as Professor Bregham mentioned, the mandatory Japanese language courses only last for a year and a half, the first 3 semesters, or more like, but then there are elective Japanese courses that are offered after those 3 semesters as well. And there are intensive courses where you can really improve your Japanese language ability, even if you start from learning hiragana and katakana, which was the case for me as well. And also for elective Japanese courses, you don't just learn about like basic communication skills, but you can take courses on like reading actual scholarly articles in Japanese. And it's not just about being able to speak and communicate in that language, but then actually to use that language for academic purposes and various other purposes depending on your needs. And I really wanted to talk about some of the other aspects of student lives that were not mentioned by Julie and Professor Bregham. So for study abroad programs, University of Tokyo offers plenty of opportunities, and first one is called USTEP. And for USTEP program, students are offered with university scholarship and pay tuition fee for University of Tokyo, and then they can choose from any of the partner universities they're interested in. And it can last for 1 semester to 1 year. And you don't necessarily have to postpone your graduation to go on to study abroad. It's possible to graduate on time, but you can also extend your the period of study if you want. And for GLP GEFIL program, around, I think, 100 students are selected throughout the entire university. And the selected students are also offered scholarship to join at least 2 summer programs in other universities. And then in addition to that, we participate in group projects. The 2 major group projects, which are, the presentations are attended by relevant company representatives, and also we had some representatives from UN as well for previous presentations. And for JLP JEFL program, it is selected, the students are selected from the entire university, so it also offers you opportunity to interact with people from outside of PEAK as well, and also students with different majors, which might be a really good opportunity, educational opportunity as well. And for Global Praxis program, it's like a semester or term course or intensive course, and it's just for one course, so it usually lasts for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, like during the break. So if you don't want to make a significant commitment through USTEP or GLP JEFL, you can also consider taking a term course at, like, in Australia or somewhere through Global Praxis program. And for those who are in Japan and East Asia program and who are interested in studying more about the actual lives in East Asian countries and who want to study in those in universities, at those universities, we have Campus Asia program, which is joint program among University of Tokyo, University of Seoul, and Peking University. So you get to study 1 semester at each university. So that's also an option if you're really interested in East Asian studies. And for hands-on activities, apparently we have fieldwork courses, which are usually conducted as an intensive course during the semester. And also there is are internship opportunities which are introduced by the university, which reduces the amount of work that you should do for searching. And although Japanese language is not required to enter PEAK or take any of the courses in PEAK, you would be able to find more opportunities if you are fluent in Japanese and live in Japan for apparent reasons. And for graduation thesis, which is a required component for graduation, for environmental sciences major students, we choose our lab and our advisor at the end of the 3rd year, and we work with our advising professor for 1 year to work on our original research. And we have to present our graduation thesis in order to graduate. And I think it's a really valuable opportunity where you can actually study more deeply about the field that you're interested in, something that you found through the first 3 years of program. And for the financial aspects, Professor Bregham mentioned the U-Tokyo Scholarship, which are offered to approximately 10 students for each cohort. There are also private scholarships that are actually quite generously offered. You can enter with university with a scholarship offer, but it's also possible to apply for different scholarships during your stay at PEAK, which was the case for me actually. So even if you don't enter PEAK with the initial scholarship offer, I wanted to mention that it's possible to apply again throughout your stay in PEAK. And also it's possible to apply for tuition fee exemption as well, depending on your needs. Yep. And so, yeah, I hope to see you on campus. And I wanted to mention that I'm still a student at PEAK, and I was just like you guys preparing for college application. And Professor Bregham, I met him in Paris 3 years ago for interview. He was my interviewer. And and it feels quite weird that I am now representing the student body at PEAK to give you guys a presentation. But I really appreciate that I took the chance and I came to PEAK, academically and in terms of personal development as well. So I hope to see some of you on campus.